politics. Let's get back to Joe Biden, who, as we've mentioned, is officially has launched his campaign and is running for president of the United States once again in 2024.
Tonight, President Biden asking Americans for another 4 years, making a pitch to union members in Washington.
On my watch, infrastructure has become a decade headline. A decade.
Earlier, announcing another campaign in this video.
This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election.
Highlighting his views on abortion, voting, and LGBTQ rights, while zeroing in on Republican opponents, who he never mentions by name.
Personal freedom is fundamental to who we are as Americans. The MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms.
And touting this theme.
Let's finish this job. I know we can.
Still, our NBC News poll shows only 41% of Americans approve of the job President Biden is doing. 54% disapprove. The president's move setting up a possible rematch with former President Trump, posting this response.
With such a calamitous and failed presidency, it is almost inconceivable that Biden would even think of running for re-election.
70% of Americans say they don't want President Biden to run for re-election, including most Democrats. But 60% of Americans say they don't want Mr. Trump to run again either. Today in battleground Pennsylvania, the critical Philly suburbs, we found voters like small business owner Dora Rieta exasperated by the possibility of another Biden-Trump showdown.
What do you make of that rematch?
A mess. A mess.
Why?
I think they both are very extreme, and I think we need someone that's kind of in the middle.
Cafe owner Christine Hicks strongly supports President Biden because she says he'll protect abortion rights.
For my granddaughter, I want her to have choice, and it is upsetting to know that she has less choices now than we did.
But she's less supportive of Vice President Kamala Harris, who's featured prominently in today's video.
I don't think I would vote for Kamala if she was running for president, but she's, she supports him, and I think it's a good thing.
Independent Larry Largest, a painter, is frustrated by high inflation.
Are you satisfied with the economy these days?
No, I'm really not. Prices are going up, rent's going up, food's going up. My wages aren't going up.
And echoing what polls say many are concerned about, President Biden's age. He'd be 86 at the end of a second term.
I think he's getting a little long in the tooth. He's getting a little bit old, and I have some concerns on his mental faculties.
But retired truck driver Mike Lowry tells us he's not worried.
I'm 72 years old.
You look good.
There you go. I rest my case. Joe looks good. He looks good for an 80-year-old man.
So, Peter, we're not seeing the president out on the trail after this announcement.
Lester, Biden aides tell us he's unlikely to hold campaign rallies for months. Instead, he wants to be seen focusing on his job as president.
So I'm not thrilled about this either. And I think that we are both on record having said that we would have preferred that someone else run.
Sure.
But this is the situation that we are in. And
time to deal with reality stars.
Yeah, and it's frustrating when I hear the media talk to people and do these man on the street interviews, because you listen to people who I think aren't actively involved in politics, aren't actively following things, who say, yeah, I'm really frustrated with inflation and how expensive everything is, and my wages aren't going up. And then they use that to explain like their frustration with President Biden and why they may be voting for an alternative. And the alternative is fascism, and
right.
The alternative is revoking rights for vulnerable communities, and the alternative is far worse. And yes, things have not happened fast enough. There are not enough progressive policies in place. Biden has not been progressive enough. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But do you think you're going to convince Donald Trump to be progressive? Do you think you're going to convince Ron DeSantis to do something about your wages? Like that's really what needs to be centered in this conversation, is who are we going to be able to move the needle with in the office?
Yeah.
And if these voters think that it's going to be Donald Trump or it's going to be Ron DeSantis, it's not.
Well, especially if your concern is your wages, do you think Donald Trump, or just the Republican Party in general, is here for you? Do you think they are the ones who are trying to secure higher wages? No, they're here for tax cuts for corporations, higher profits for corporations, which absolutely in no way and never has equaled higher wages. They don't turn around. That is just the fallacy of trickle-down economics, which has been proven time and time again to not be an accurate depiction of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, this is where we are. Joe Biden's running. You can do what you're going to do in the primaries, I guess, but don't put us in another situation where we end up with a Donald Trump who will very likely get more Supreme Court picks and will be in an more untenable situation relative to people's rights and the continuation of their very lives. It's a big deal. On that note, Joe Biden is talking now because there's a lot of talk about, well, can he beat Donald Trump? You know, there's both of them have disapproval ratings that are high or approval ratings that are low. And Joe Biden's convinced, and as that he can beat Donald Trump.
You recently launched your reelection campaign. You've said questions about your age are legitimate, and your response is always, just watch me. But the country is watching, and recent polling shows that 70% of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, believe you shouldn't run again. What do you say to them? What do you say to those Americans who are watching and aren't convinced? You've said you can beat Trump again. Do you think you're the only one?
I may not be the only one, but I know him well, and I know the danger he presents to our democracy, and we've been down this road before. And with regard to age, you know, and polling data, I noticed the polling data I keep hearing about is that I'm between 42 and 46% favorable rating, et cetera. And but everybody running for re-election in this time has been in the same position. There's nothing new about that. We're making it sound like Biden's really underwater. Number one. Number two, when the same polling data asks whether they think what kind of job I've done, it gets overwhelmingly positive results. From 58% thinking everything from the CHIPS Act and all the things we've done. You know, we've created, like I said, we've created 12 million new jobs. We've created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. We have economic growth moving. We're in a situation where the climate, we've invested more money and more help in dealing with the climate crisis than any nation in the world. And so things are moving. And the reason I'm running again is there's a job to finish. The other thing is that, look, you know, think about what I inherited when I got elected. I inherited a nation in overwhelming debt at the time, number one, in the hole for the 4 years that he was president. I inherited a nation that had a serious loss of credibility around the world as America first. And, you know, the first meeting I attended the G7, I said, America's back. And one of the world leaders looked and said, for how long? For how long? There's a great concern about the United States being able to lead the free world. And we're doing that again. And those same polls you look at, you take a look at the polls, they're saying whether I pull together NATO and the European Union as well as Asian partners, I think we have. But there's more to do. And with regard to age, I can't even say, I guess how old I am, I can't even say the number. It doesn't register with me. And but the only thing I can say is that one of the things that people are going to find out is they're going to see a race and they're going to judge whether or not I have it or don't have it. I respect them taking a hard look at it. I take a hard look at it as well. I took a hard look at it before I decided to run. And I feel good. I feel excited about the prospects. And I think we're on the verge of really turning the corner in a way we haven't in a long time. I know you're tired of hearing me say we're at an inflection point. Well, we really are. What happens in the next 2, 3, 4 years is going to determine what the next 3, 4 decades look like. And I have never been more optimistic in my life about the possibilities of the United States.
So, I mean, like I said, and I think this is going to be a balancing act during the campaigning because, you know, it's not ideal for me. It's not ideal.
Right.
But I know what the alternative is. And that's
dangerous.
Yeah, I don't know who else is going to be throwing their hat in the ring for the Democratic primary here. It doesn't seem like anyone is. It seems like the party is largely recognizing that the path forward is Joe Biden, and they're all kind of rallying behind him. I know Bernie Sanders, before Joe Biden announced that he was running for re-election, he was often asked on the Sunday shows during his appearances, is he going to run again? And he would always say that he was supportive of Joe Biden and, hasn't made a decision, whatever. So I'm not hearing that there's other alternatives that are going to be throwing their hat in the ring. And even though it's not ideal, and we are still going to have criticism for Joe Biden, it's not like we're going to stop criticizing him. Not. And I think it's important to do that. But I think the balancing act is going to come with criticizing him, but not so much that people start saying that they're not going to ultimately vote for him over Donald Trump.
Right. So here's what people are talking about relative to his election and his chances, that he has a lower approval rating, and but so does Donald Trump. And if they act like these numbers never change. And then the other thing is that once it's a binary choice, once we've gone through the primary and it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, if that's what it ends up being, it's a binary choice. Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump, and people are going to have a choice to choose the maniac or the time-tested, the guy that you know what to expect. And I just don't see Donald Trump coming out victorious. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't have a chance. Absolutely. The vote totals were very narrow in several of the states that ended up going Biden's way, and that could change. There's a lot of maniacs out there who believe that the insurrection was a tourist event. So it's not a foregone conclusion that Biden would win, and we need to stay active and in the fight relative to this upcoming election. It's very important.
Absolutely.
We'd love to hear from you about these or any other topics. 657-464-7609. Of course, you can email a voice memo from your smartphone to idoubt@dollemore.com.